Welcome life science learners to another installment of Life Sciences. Today we're focusing on a topic called homeostasis and coordination. So what is homeostasis? I'm sure you guys have thought about this. So we're going to need to unpack that. We're going to be looking at how homeostasis is maintained in the body. We're going to try and focus on concepts like negative feedback, and we're going to try and see how different conditions are maintained within what we call a stable internal environment. Okay, so let's get into the concepts of this lesson. So, have you ever thought about the following? How is the temperature of the body maintained constant? And you know that recently we've had to constantly measure our body temperatures when we've entered different venues or you've been to school. And you would notice that generally there seems to be a normal temperature range which everyone's looking out for. So what is it that keeps the body within that normal range? So it's quite interesting that there's a complex mechanism behind all of that that ensures that the body temperature remains the same. If we consider other things that remain within a normal range, think about your heart rate. Your heart rate has a normal range which it fluctuates around. Often when you go to a doctor, he checks your blood pressure and he'll tell you, well, it's within the normal range. So what is it that keeps the body within this normal range? And that's what we need to unpack today. So I have a multiple choice question for you. And so it reads, homeostasis is the following. Let's choose. Allows for a widely fluctuating internal environment. B, is impossible in vertebrates. C, is the maintenance of a relatively stable internal environment and often incorporates a form of feedback regulation. Or D, is the maintenance of a relatively stable external environment and often incorporates a form of feedback regulation. So these are four options that are quite similar, and hence I would engage with you during the lesson, and hopefully at the end of this lesson you're able to explain what homeostasis is and give us a concise definition for that. So let's look at the concepts that we're going to discuss in our lesson today. So we're going to unpack what the definition is of homeostasis. We're going to look at how homeostasis is maintained in the body. We're going to unpack the two systems that bring about balance and coordination. We're going to have an overview of what the nervous system is and how that coordinates body functions. We're going to have to overview what the endocrine system is. We're going to spend some time looking at a concept called negative feedback. And we're going to bring about a comparisons between the two systems. And then finally, we're going to look at what happens when homeostasis fails. So let's get straight into the lesson. As we normally do, we need to look at the key words and some important concepts. So the first term that we're going to be unpacking is homeostasis. The next concept we're going to look at is the mechanism of negative feedback. And in that, we're going to look at what a receptor is, what an effector is, and what the nervous system does. We will also look at how the nervous system uses nerve impulses. We're going to spend some time looking at chemical messages in the endocrine system. We're going to look at what hormones are. We're going to try and understand what a normal range is and possibly discuss some abnormalities when things do not function within the normal range. So, the illustration I have on the board essentially shows you someone trying to balance on what we know is kind of a balance or a seesaw. And you know that at some point when you've been playing around on a seesaw, things eventually need to balance out for individuals to be kind of even on either side. If not, you'll find that if it's an unequal balance, you'll find that the seesaw tips in a specific direction and you realize that, oh no, you're going to need to do something on the other end to bring it back to balance. So essentially, the body has to constantly do that. There's always a change from one to the other. And so the body compensates for that by bringing about a response so that that balance can be maintained. So we need to look at why this balance is important, and I'll answer that question in a little bit. So, homeostasis is a process of maintaining a constant internal environment within the body. And I'd like to repeat that. So again, homeostasis is a process of maintaining a constant internal environment. So think of all the conditions in our body. They always fluctuate within what we call a normal range. And that's the constant range that we refer to. So all the mechanisms that are responsible for maintaining this constant internal environment is essentially maintaining homeostasis. So the internal environment refers to the blood and the tissue fluid that surrounds the cells of the body. Homeostasis enables the body to function efficiently despite changes that might occur in the external or the internal environment. So essentially what homeostasis does is that it is a mechanism that keeps the body at a constant level. So if it's winter, you know that it's really cold and your body tends to lose heat. However, in that process, we don't cool down. So the body still maintains its core temperature around 36.9, 37 degrees. So why is it that we can still be functioning normal, yet the temperature outside is extremely low? And that's because the body has mechanisms to ensure that the core temperature remains within the normal range. Essentially, that happens when you consume a meal and your blood sugar levels increase. So the body has to compensate and bring that blood sugar levels back to normal. And so these are mechanisms that are responsible for that, which we need to look at in a bit. So, how is homeostasis maintained? In this illustration, I've described to you essentially the process of what balance is and what happens when the body responds to these changes. So what's going to happen is that the body will pick up a stimulus, and that's a receptor that picks up that stimulus. It will then inform the control center, and that control center is going to send a stimulus to an organ called the effector. That effector will then respond to the stimulus and bring about a change, and that change will try and bring the body back to a balance or restore what the imbalance was. And so this cycle of events ensures that there is a stimulus that is received. The control center responds to that by sending an impulse to the effector organ, thereby bringing about a change. And that change establishes what we call the balance, which was created by a change in the variable. So that's in an overview. So as I mentioned, homeostasis is a complex process that consists of individual units working in a particular sequence to balance and give in response to a variable. So all your homeostasis mechanisms consist of 4 separate units, which we will unpack now. A stimulus, which is what the stimulus is in terms of the body understands as a change. A sensor or a receptor that identifies the change. And then a control center which interprets that change. And then the control center sends out a message to an effector organ to bring about a change in an opposite manner to restore the balance. So these are the 4 systems or components of homeostasis. So what is a stimulus? A stimulus is something that results in changes within the system involving the variable. So if you have a meal and your blood sugar increases, that's a stimulus. If you exercise and your heart rate increases, that's a stimulus. So there are various stimuli that the body has to respond to. So these are then sent to a control center. Now, the stimulus represents that variable which has moved away from what we call the normal range, initiating a process of homeostasis. This will then follow a stimulus being received by what we call receptors. So it is a sensor or a receptor that senses or identifies a unit of homeostasis, where it monitors and responds to the change in the body. The changes in the system are realized by the sensor, which then sends the information to the control unit. So, in our body, we've got stimuli that come in, we've got sensors in our body, and often these are in the brain, but in various other parts. And then the brain will analyze the stimulus, and it'll interpret that and identify a change from the normal. It will then respond using the effector. So that control center is once again going to interpret that, and it's going to send information that then needs to be received by an effector organ, and that is through identifying something that is against the normal value. If the value is different from the normal, the control center will activate an effector organ, which then brings about a response to that stimulus. So let's look at what an effector is. An effector can be muscles, it could be organs, glands, or similar structures that are activated as a result of a signal from the control unit. An effector is a target which is acted upon by the control unit to bring about the value of the variable back to normal. The effector is essentially counteracts the stimulus to nullify or to bring the effect back to normal. So we've looked at the stimulus, we've looked at the receptor, we've looked at the control unit, we've looked at the effector. And let's try and put that all together into a summary of what we've looked at. So in this segment, we've looked at the concept of homeostasis. We've tried to understand what homeostasis means in terms of maintaining a constant internal environment. We've also looked at the process of how the response is created. So there has to be a stimulus, which is then received by the control unit. The control unit then processes that information, identifies a change from the normal range, and then institutes or sends out an impulse to the effector organ. The effector organ could be glands, could be muscles, but could be various other organs that respond to that change and then bring about a change in the opposite manner. And that will then try to bring the balance back to normal. So guys, we've unpacked what homeostasis is. You guys need to have a little break to get back to normal, relax, breathe, get some oxygen into those muscles, and then we will start with the next segment. So see you in a bit after the break.